Hi, I'm Jess, part-time Hobbit, and I'm here to talk to you about Tolkien. Home is a very unique word. It's so simple and used so often, and yet, if you think about it, it's likely that you'll find it hard to define. The idea of home and what exactly that word means is one of the most prevalent overarching themes of Tolkien's works. His stories are about going there and back again, and there would be stripped of meaning if not for that all-important back again. I have always had very complex emotions wrapped around the word home, which have been greatly influenced by the constant presence of Tolkien's works in my life. Also, if you've been following this channel, you'll know that I just moved, so all of these ideas have definitely been on my mind lately. So let's sit down and talk about the way that Tolkien explores home and belonging in his works, so that I can talk about the ways that it resonates with me, and maybe with you as well. Tolkien's works offer one of the most profound and nuanced literary takes on the idea of home. But to fully appreciate how he addresses this theme in his books, it helps to examine a few of the biographical details from Tolkien's real life that may have informed his opinions. Tolkien was born in South Africa in 1892. Though he only spent a few brief years there as a child, he retained some memories of it when his family moved to England in 1896. Obviously, I can't say exactly what impact this had on him, but I can speak from my own similar experiences. I spent the first 3 years of my life in Hawaii before my family and I moved back to Virginia. I was so young that it's difficult for me to discern what I truly remember from that time versus what memories I invented based off of imagination and what my family told me from that time. But as my sense of the world began to develop, I was distinctly aware that my home in Virginia had not always been home. Knowing from your earliest memories that home can be impermanent has a deeply lasting impact on the way that you process belonging. This feeling, this fundamental disconnect between where you are now and where you were permeates Tolkien's written works. This angst we see through his writing is likely inspired by his own angst on the subject. Upon leaving South Africa, the Tolkien family lived in the idyllic countryside at Sarehole Mill in England. This delightful pocket of pastoral bliss lay just on the outskirts of gritty, industrialized Birmingham. Since Tolkien spent time in both of these places, he was able to notice the distinct differences between the two. The world was never one small place for Tolkien. From the very beginning, there was a place that was home and a place that was not home, which I believe allowed him to idealize the countryside and Sarehole Mill in a way that many people his age didn't. Tolkien's next major shift in geography came in World War I, when he left his newlywed wife and home and shipped off to France to come face to face with some of history's worst atrocities. It's here that Tolkien's acute longing for home took a place in his writing. He began shaping out the world that we now know as Middle-earth, a world that bears longing for a peaceful home as one of its central threads. We also cannot disregard Tolkien's Catholic faith, a guidepost in his life and his philosophy. Judeo-Christian theology is deeply embedded with this feeling of longing for a homeland from which they have been removed. In the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve began their lives in the Garden of Eden, but were later cast out from that place that they had called home. Much of the rest of the Bible narrates the journey of the Jewish people towards their new home. Not the Garden of Eden, but the better, promised land that God has sworn to lead them to. In the New Testament, Jesus expanded on and deepened this idea of the promised land. Followers of Christ were not looking for a physical place to be their promised land, but to the promised land of heaven, where they would be eternally at home with God. The major Christian thinker St. Augustine wrote that hope is a necessity for us in these days of exile from heaven. It is our consolation on the journey. The journey of every Catholic person is the long path to a perfect homeland, one that they have not seen, but that they long for, with a type of fervor that can fuel them through the trials and tribulations of the lifelong trip. These ideas were fundamental to Tolkien's life and were expertly woven through his stories. The elves, Tolkien's firstborn, clearly display these themes. The elves first woke in Cuivennen in the east, but when the Valar, essentially the demigods of Middle-earth, found them, they invited the elves to Valinor. Valinor is the western land where all of the Valar lived, and it was also called the Undying Lands. It's a place of beauty and bliss, and the elves that crossed the sea fell deeply in love with it. The elves spent many years in the peace of Valinor, but evil could not sleep forever. And Morgoth, the greatest evil force in Middle-earth, manipulated the elves, leading to many of them leaving Valinor and returning to Middle-earth. Though the elves would make new homes for themselves in Middle-earth, their art, their music, and their hearts would never stop longing for Valinor. And at the end of the Third Age, when the events from The Lord of the Rings are wrapping up, most of the elves leave Middle-earth and are able to return to their sacred homeland. In contrast to this perfect homecoming, Tolkien tells the story of the dwarves. In The Hobbit, the dwarves long for their ancestral homeland just as the elves did. But even once they've killed Smaug and taken back Erebor, it's hardly the perfect homecoming. It becomes clear that this is not the predestined, joyous return that they had sung about. Thorin is corrupted, the mountain is besieged, and many die defending it. It may have been the land that they were promised, but it's not the place they dreamed it to be. This same story is echoed in the dwarves' relationship to Moria. Moria is the ultimate homeland of the dwarves, their greatest stronghold before they were forced to flee by the Balrog. Much of the dwarves' cultural identity is shaped by their exile from this place. As they wandered, lost, they yearned for it. They told stories and they sang, and consequently they turned Moria from a memory into a myth. In doing this, the dwarves made a true return to their homeland impossible. The Moria that they seek is an impossible goal, as we see through the journey of the Fellowship through the caves at Khazad-dûm. Dwarven culture is shaped by this longing, a longing that will never be satiated by a home that never was. The last place we're going to look is probably the most tangible of the three, and probably the thing you thought of when you saw this video. The Shire. For many of us, the Shire is the epitome of the cozy, desirable home. Or maybe I just think that because I'm a hobbit. In many ways, the Shire is the emotional core of The Lord of the Rings. More specifically, it's the emotional core of our main characters. The Shire is what they fight for, and it's the hope of returning to this home that keeps them going even when all else seems lost. Hobbiton is the back again to our there. Of course, the version of the Shire that the hobbits recall is idealized. Living in Hobbiton would be like having to deal with the world's worst homeowners association. No plastic lawn flamingos in the Shire. Even just in the tone of the first chapter of Fellowship, we can see just how frustrating Hobbiton could be. Hobbits are stubborn, curmudgeonly, and highly exclusive. They maintain their perfect home by excluding anything that they may find imperfect. The Shire is a bubble, and many of its residents would do anything to keep it from popping. So even the penultimate home in Tolkien's world is flawed. We see this most clearly in Bilbo and Frodo's return to Hobbiton. It's not an easy homecoming. They have changed and the Shire has not. The home that they've spent their journey longing for doesn't exist, and maybe it never did. The Shire has lost its glamour, and now they long for a truer home. And I think this is where we find Tolkien's thesis. Someone who lived the life that Tolkien lived would have struggled to define home, since his definition is shaped largely by not being there. We come to understand and adore the Shire not by lingering there, but by our characters leaving it. We understand our protagonist's home by the impact that it has on them and the way that it helps them carry on. In Tolkien's world, the most perfect home that we'll find is the one that we're away from, the one that lives in our memory, untainted by harsh reality, that gives us the motivation to keep searching. I grew up in England, in a small village beside a small lake in a small cottage, and from that vantage point, the world seemed so big. That cottage was the first place that I thought of as home, and since I left, a part of me has always longed for it. Of course, I know that when I go back someday, it won't be the same. It's been 15 years. People have gone, trees have been felled, and the world that I remember isn't real. This is something that Tolkien deeply understood. Tolkien doesn't solve this longing for home. We never see Frodo and Bilbo reach the Undying Lands. We're left waiting with them, hoping with them that there's a better home, and hoping that someday we can find that too. What home is doesn't matter as much as what it could be. Reality is often harsh and unforgiving, but Tolkien offers us a respite. It's okay that you haven't found home yet. None of us have, and it's possible that in this life we aren't meant to, because it's the discontent that drives you. That's what pushes you out the door and onto your next adventure. Home is behind, the world ahead. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It has been a crazy couple of weeks, but I am really glad that I got to work on this. It was kind of hard for me to tell how much of the content of this video would connect with other people, since it was a little more personal. So please let me know in the comments what you agreed and disagreed with in this video. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, because it really helps me out in the algorithm, and subscribe if you don't want to miss any more of my videos. If you'd like to donate any money to this channel, the link to my Ko-fi virtual tip jar is in the description right down here. A huge thank you to those of you who have already donated to the Ko-fi. It really does mean a lot. I appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time out of your day to join me here, and I hope that you all have a very happy, hobbity day.